So we're starting a sermon series, and we're talking about donkeys, but I don't want to talk about donkeys first. The first thing we're going to talk about actually is actually another Methodist pastor who's actually currently retired. His name is Robert. And he lives in Australia. And he was a Methodist pastor his entire life down there, eventually becoming kind of like a circuit elder. They construct things a little differently than we do. Wrote several books during his time on the history of evangelism. Now, you don't know Robert, but Robert has a Wikipedia page, which is something, right? Anybody have a Wikipedia page? No, so you know you've made it when you at least have a Wikipedia page after you. Robert has one, but not for being a Methodist pastor. He has one because he's standing next to a telescope. Because Robert has a distinction. Even though his profession is pastor, he is an amateur astronomer. And he discovered very early in life that he had a unique ability when it came to looking at the stars. His brain was wired in such a way that he could look at a place in the universe up in the sky, and then he could remember it almost as if there was a photograph in his head. So if he saw it again, he could immediately know if there were any changes in that little piece of the sky that he was looking at. In fact, he was so good at it that it's only in the last about 15 years or so that we have computers and cameras and digital stuff that can do it as well as he did it just on his own with his telescope. Now, one of the things, if you're able to do this, if you can spot the differences between little patches of night sky, that will help you do something. And one of the things that will help you do is spot things called supernovas, which are really big. And a supernova is basically what happens when a star, this is the last thing a lot of stars do before they go out completely, is they explode. Right? And so you can imagine, right, a large star exploding is going to be probably a fairly big event, but they also tend to happen very, very far away. And they're also very uncommon. So what you're looking for when you look at the night sky is you're looking for basically a difference in brightness. You're trying to see, did this piece of sky get brighter than it was? So this is a hobby that Robert picked up. It's something he decided he had some passion for. He was not an expert in it. He was not a trained astronomer. But Robert has actually discovered more supernova than anybody else on Earth, including people who are paid to look for supernova, right? He's discovered 43 of them, and which is a pretty big deal. And so he would spot one, and then he would basically pass it off to the people who have the really big telescopes and say, "Can you go look at this and see if I'm right?" And they would go, "Sure enough, yes, Robert, you are right. You found another one." And it's this great quote that he wrote that I loved. He says, "There's something satisfying, I think, about the idea of light traveling for millions of years through space. And at just the right moment, it reaches the Earth. Someone looks at just the right bit of sky and sees it. It just seems right that in the event of that magnitude should be witnessed." Right? And I think that's true. I think, oftentimes we do look up at the sky, and it is gorgeous and it is wonderful, but we fail to realize how far so much of that has come. The distance, frankly, for us are incomprehensible. And yet here we are, simple, basic creatures that we are, and we get to see it, and we get to witness it. And Robert loved this, so he spent most of the time he wasn't being a pastor looking up at the sky and doing something doing something miraculous that even the experts in his field, the paid professionals in his field, couldn't do. Because he knew, he understood, he had a way of seeing that others didn't have. Now, that actually does bring us to donkeys. And if you heard that this was a story about a talking donkey today, you may be thinking like this one. Yeah. But no, we are not talking about the Eddie Murphy talking donkey from the movie Shrek. We're actually talking about the story that we read this morning, which is Balaam. Now, Balaam comes to us, this story comes to us from the book of Numbers. So if you know anything about the Old Testament, you know Numbers is part of the first 5 books, also called the books of Moses. And that chronicles the story of the earliest times of the people of God, including the journey away from slavery to Egypt to the Promised Land. So where Balaam enters the story is that the Israelites are about 40 years removed from their experience of being slaves in Egypt, and because they are a bit of a wayward people who don't always do what they're told, they've been wandering the desert, and they've been wandering the desert now for almost 40 years. So that's where we are in the kind of larger story. And they're coming close to finally arriving at this place that God has promised them. And on their way there, they've had to go through other kingdoms. So they've been through two kind of more that are more to the south that those kingdoms didn't like the idea these folks were coming, and so there was this conflict between the Israelites and those two kingdoms, and in both cases, the Israelites came out on top. The next kind of kingdom in order is the kingdom of Moab. And so the king of Moab is getting concerned. Here's this large group of people. They're having victory. We don't know what's going on. We need somebody to help us. And so the king of Moab is the one that actually sends for Balaam. Now, Balaam is described in a couple of different ways, but he is they're calling him because they want him to put a curse on the Israelites, because apparently that's how we did things 3,000 years ago. And now Balaam is not an Israelite. He's not a Jew. He is what the rabbis would later call one of the 7 Gentile prophets. But even though he's not, he does seem to have some connection to God. When we read in the scripture about Balaam talking to God, it's not a generic God. It is very specifically the God of Israel. So even though Balaam is not part of Israel, is not one of God's people at that moment, he has some sort of connection with the God of Israel that isn't really explained, because the Old Testament loves to leave things unexplained. So we can just wonder. So just wonder. But so Moab's calling him. So the king of Moab's calling him because he seems to have some special connection with God, right? Balaam seems to have some kind of special power, some sort of special connection. So the king of Moab's like, I can use this guy to put a curse on all these Israelites, so maybe they won't come into my area. So that's what sets all this up in the first place. So Balaam is called by the king of Moab to go, and then the story gets picked up where we found it, which is Balaam is going, but the Lord is standing in his way. Now, this story is interesting for a lot of reasons. One is because I don't run into a lot of talking animals. Maybe you do. If you do, I'd like a visit. Call me. I'd like to see that. But this is almost written kind of in the style of like a fable. But so we have this really. So we have Moses. We got Balaam. He's on his donkey. He's going, and then the angel of the Lord stands in his way, because they want to make sure Balaam does what the Lord actually wants him to do. So the angel of the Lord stands in his way. Now, what's fascinating is who sees the angel of the Lord. Not Balaam. Not the expert. Not the one who already has a pre-existing connection to God. Not somebody who's recognized as somebody of special talent and ability and skill, right? Not the special person of authority and expertise who's being called by the king. That's not who sees the angel of the Lord standing there. The one who has the special ability to see in this case is the donkey, right? The donkey is the one that sees it. The donkey is the one that tries to take action. The donkey is the one that says, wait a minute, this thing in front of us, this isn't good. What's going on here? Why aren't we stopping? And so we get this altercation between Balaam and his donkey, and eventually the donkey speaks and explains to him, like, hey, come on, moron. I think sometimes we live in a place and a space where we are surrounded and we have access to so many experts. we have access to so many people who have such great and wonderful knowledge that we can sometimes forget that we have knowledge too, that we are experts in things too. Now, I'm not anti-expert, and there is this weird sort of kind of like anti-expert thing going on or anti-professional thing going on in our world, and I don't get that, because frankly, when I got on an airplane, I want an expert in the front of that plane, right? I want somebody who's flown this route 1 million times. I want somebody who can do it while they're sleeping, and then I want them to not sleep, right? Like, that's same thing. Like, I don't want to be anybody's first root canal. Sorry, don't want it. I want an expert, right? So there are times. Expertise is important. It's not a bad thing. We need those folks in our lives that have that particular skill set that we don't have, and it's good that we have access to them. But that we got to remember, that's not all. But that we still have a role to play in that too. Now, when I was 24, I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes at a time in my life when I really did not want to be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. I was having a good time. I was recently married. I had a job where I was jet setting all over the place. I was eating in fun restaurants all the time on somebody else's nickel, which just even makes it taste better. And so I remember going to my doctor and then being like, all right, you got to do this, and I'm like, all right, whatever. I was a really, really, really bad patient, right? To the point, this is how you know you're a bad patient, is when you do finally go to the doctor for your 6-month follow-up that was supposed to be a 3-month follow-up, and they ask you, okay, so what time, when are you taking this medication? And you have to look at them and go, is that the little red one or the big white one? Because I take the big white one in the morning, and I take the little red, and they're like, you don't even know what you're taking. And I'm like, I take what you tell me to take, right? And I was not particularly engaged in my care, right? I would show up, they'd take things out, they'd put things in, they'd tell me what's wrong with me, and then they'd write me down something, and I would, like, how often, whatever, read the bottle, and on my merry way. If my wife were here, she'd be cringing right now. Bill is, right? I mean, Bill's a doctor if you don't know that. All right. But I was basically sort of abdicating, my personal physical health to other experts. The problem is when we do that, and the problem in that moment is the people I were seeing, sure, they were experts in medicine and they were experts in care and they could read all these charts and do all things I couldn't do, but what they were not an expert in is they were not an expert in me, right? They didn't know everything. They didn't know everything about my life. They didn't know about my lifestyle. They didn't know how much I traveled. They didn't know this. They didn't know that. Nobody else knows those things. I know those things. And if I was ever going to be serious about my care and I was ever going to take this condition seriously and work it in such a way, I couldn't just abdicate it all to the experts around me. I had to claim something important, which is that there is only one expert in the universe about me, and it's me, right? I had to own my part of it. That if this was going to work and I was going to actually get to a place where I wasn't harming my body and I wasn't doing things, wasn't doing things that were bad for me, then I had to realize I had a part to play in this too. It wasn't just the responsibility of those experts that I engage in, but that I had something important to bring to the table as well. Because I knew me. I knew what I was going through. I knew what my challenges were. And I needed to be honest about those. And once I started doing that, then things began to shift and change. I was talking to my wife is also a medical provider. I was talking to her last night, and I was like, what is the one thing, you wish your patients would do? And then I'm like, I can't say that. What's the next thing that you wish your patient would do. And she talked about this. She talked about, being honest and telling her like what's actually going on and collecting the information that she needs and sharing with it and being willing to be vulnerable and just be experts in themselves. That so many things for her would be so much better if people would actually just tell her what's really going on. Because apparently we all lie to our doctors. I know I do, I just thought it was me. Here in the church, we actually have a similar job to the healthcare providers that you go and see or anything else. I hate to break it to you, I am not here to be a Christian on your behalf. That's not really how this works, right? The purpose of the church is to provide everybody with opportunities to grow and encounter God and to grow in their spiritual health. That's why we're here, right? And it takes all sorts of forms. So sometimes it looks like this on Sunday mornings. Sometimes it looks the way we serve. Sometimes it looks like our small groups. Sometimes it looks like wearing your pajamas to church to read to little kids, which is super fun. You should do it. So this was just on Friday, actually. But that is what we do here. And that's why we are here, because we each are on our own journey with God. We are each on our own spiritual journey to better spiritual health. It's why we're here and what we're here to do, right? To give everybody an opportunity to encounter the Holy Spirit, to give everybody an opportunity to be challenged and comforted by God, sometimes at the same time. And to help everyone recognize that when it comes to you and your journey with God and your journey through life and what that looks like, there is no expert other than you. And it's going to look a little different for all of us. It's going to look a little different for all of us because we all have been given different graces and different gifts. We've all been given different opportunities. We've all been born into different families. We've all had different experiences in life. Right? The one thing that is the same for all of us is first and foremost that we are God's beloved children, that we are worthy of the love that God offers to us, that we are challenged to take that love and use it and put it back out in the world in all of the ways that we can, based on who we are and what opportunities we have. We should partner with the experts in our lives. We should use the wisdom that they have. But we should also never dismiss the wisdom that is in each and every one of us, because we all have our own unique eyes and our own unique perspective on the world. We've all seen our own unique things. We're all shaped in our own unique ways. And for better or worse, whether we like it or not, that seems to be part of God's plan. It seems to be the way God wants it to be. So be the expert of your life. Be the expert of knowing where God is working in your life, where you are being loved and challenged to love others. And recognize that that person sitting next to you, they are the expert in their life. They are being loved, and they are being challenged to love one another. That's why here on this Sunday, as we do every Sunday, we come to this table. And everybody comes. Everybody comes. It's open to everybody to come to God's table and receive the grace that is offered there. No one can do it for you. It's one of those things you have to recognize yourself. You are loved because you are God's beloved child. You are challenged to share that love with others because others need to know that too.